In 1000 AD, Norsemen landed at Newfoundland. By 1492, Columbus sailed west. In 1507, a map named the land America, though its center was left blank. What else was omitted in ink? A scroll half burned, an amphora encrusted in coral, a map unfinished. Between 1000 and 1616, explorers crossed oceans. Vikings, Portuguese, Spanish. Objects surfaced, but many records ended mid-sentence. When continents were named, what else was never written? Welcome to history's ledger. Tonight, we trace 5 mistakes that ended voyages long before the sails were lowered. Not as loud verdicts, but as quiet patterns. Maps that insisted on certainty while the world refused it. Diseases that arrived ahead of greetings. Treasure mistaken for foundations. You'll hear ink scratch, feel salt on parchment, see gold-flecked sea charts, velvet-lined cases, brass astrolabes, luxury that survived longer than those who carried it. And you'll notice where lines stop, how often history trails off exactly where answers should begin. Settle in. The water is calm, the pages are not. The surf was restless. It broke against black stone, rolled back, and returned again with force. The air smelled sharp, salt, kelp, resin drawn from inland forests. Somewhere between sea and trees, Norsemen pulled their ships ashore. Around the year 1000, they called it Vinland. For a time, there was sound. Axes striking spruce, iron on wood, mallets pounding beams, sod blocks stacked for walls, roofs low and covered in turf. Hearths glowed with pine. Smoke rose, carrying the scent of fish, drying on racks and hides stretched tight on poles. Winter came. Cattle grazed until snow fell. Hunters followed deer through birch groves, feet crackling on frost. Women spun wool, spindles humming. Children laughed above the hiss of flames. And then, quiet. When ships returned, the hearths were black but cold. Roofs sagged. Sod walls collapsed inward. The forest pressed in, reclaiming what had been cleared. Damp earth replaced fire. Not a voice remained. What happened is silence. Did hunger drive them back? Conflict with scralings? Did winters win? The sagas say 3 winters, then trail off. Luxury crossed with them, delicate and defiant. A blue bead, buried where it didn't belong. A bronze cloak pin, green with age but sharp-edged still. An iron rivet from a longship, corroded but whole. Each whispering that they were here. Mystery waits beside them, not cruel, just patient. It lives in the absence of names, in blank margins where records might have been, in sagas that begin and end too quickly. A later traveler, walking among the ruins, bent to a hearthstone. He touched it. His hand came away black with soot, They were here, he said. No answer came. The first mistake had already been made, mistaking arrival for permanence. They crossed oceans, set hearths in new soil, but the land gave nothing back. What remains isn't a story, it's a fragment, a bead, a pin, a rivet, a stone gone cold. Luxury breathes faintly in those fragments. Mystery leans close, reminding us. Even the first explorers learned, the world does not keep what cannot endure. The fires were gone. The silence had begun. The horizon was empty until one cry broke it. Tierra! A sailor's voice cut the dark on an October night in 1492. Lanterns swung wildly. Men rushed to the rail. Ahead, the shape of an island rose from the water. Christopher Columbus believed he had reached the Indies. The name didn't fit. He used it anyway. The island was called Guanahani by those who lived there. He named it San Salvador. His men stepped onto tide wet sand with banners painted in gold. The surf hissed at their boots. Inland, drums pulsed beneath the canopy. Columbus knelt, lips to ground, part prayer, part claim. The mistake was immediate, renaming a world not yet known. The air smelled of cooking fires and flowers opening in heat. Villagers approached slowly, offering parrots, food, cotton. They touched iron blades and traced seams in dyed cloth. Columbus wrote of their generosity and how easily they might be taken. Luxury crossed in the cramped ships, mirrors of polished steel exchanged for fruit, scarlet cloth, folded in trunks, handed as gifts. A ceremonial sword raised high like it held divine weight. These objects gleamed against the brightness of the tropics, proud to have survived the crossing. Mystery lingered, even in certainty. Columbus wrote of green rivers and endless forests, but his compass notes drift, and some entries end abruptly. A ship's log records, the coast is wide, the water sweet, then nothing. Pages were left blank. By the next year, he returned with more ships, anchoring off Hispaniola. 1 million people lived on the island. Within decades, almost none remained. Not by sword, but by sickness. Diseases crossed faster than sails. Villages emptied. Fields went quiet. Ledgers that once listed tribute stopped mid-line. In Santo Domingo, Columbus dined from silver goblets, served imported wine, while laborers collapsed in fields. Velvet banners hung limp in the humid air. Rosaries of carved ivory coiled in trunks beside melting candles. Luxury observed what conquest unmade. One evening, a clerk closed his ledger and whispered, "There are fewer, each day." Another voice replied, "Write what you must. Leave the rest." Columbus sailed further. Cuba, Jamaica, Trinidad, mapped with bold words, though the land resisted names. In 1498, he touched the mouth of South America and wrote, "The land is." The line breaks. The sentence ends. Luxury returned in ships heavy with gold dust, pearls, parrots, and captives. Sea charts flecked with gold ink were drawn for kings. They looked certain, they were not. The second mistake had already begun, plague moving faster than maps. But the first error never ended. To rename what was not understood, to mistake a map for the world, to believe the wrong India could still be truth. The sails cracked as they turned east. Behind them, the names they chose would stay. The ones they erased would not. Cold air hung in the stone rooms at Saint-Dié. A press creaked, metal type clicked, ink, linseed darkened with soot, smelled heavy and sweet. On the table, linen sheets dried in racks, smooth from pumice, rubbed with agate. Across 12 wood blocks, the new hemisphere curved, coasts drawn bold, interiors left pale. The name, America, written with confidence. After Amerigo Vespucci, pigments weighted in shells, lapis blue, verdigris green, vermilion for the compass rose. A goose quill rasped as titles were lettered in Roman capitals. Cloaks hung near the door, damp wool scenting the air. A parchment globe in the corner gave off glue and horsehair. Luxury traced the edges of the work, gilded letter stamps, polished agate, silk-bound brushes. The press wore a quiet shine from years of use, none of it loud, all of it enduring. Mystery stood in the margins. Why his name? Vespucci sailed in 1499 and 1501, tracing South America's coast. His letters claimed this was not Asia, but something else. Were they accurate, embellished, misread? No one questioned the quill that set America to paper. Once named, the world changed. On a proof sheet, a note appeared. Terra incognita, nondum explorata. Unknown land, not yet explored. The scribe blotted it gently. The blotter smelled faintly of rosewater. Down in Lisbon and Seville, ships returned with logs, soaked in brine, pages missing, rivers described in haste. The water is sweet, the sky, and nothing more. A corner torn, a line unfinished. In Saint-Dié, the pressman lowered the platen. The bed slid back. A sheet emerged, bearing continents at the edge of knowledge. Borders fixed, centers hollow. Amerigo wrote from Florence, perhaps Seville, trying to explain. Not the west of Asia, but a new quarter of the world. The map believed him. It had to. Names fill silence, but maps speak twice. One voice announces, the other hesitates. From the Orinoco to the Paraná, from hills guessed to rivers never reached, the engraving left blankness, beautiful and dangerous. Thin curls of wood rose from the carver's blade. He paused, thumb against edge, testing a line of mountains no one had climbed. Sometimes art replaces fact. Sometimes confidence hides doubt. In a cabinet nearby, a lens rested in a copper frame. Held over the map, it magnified coastline into cut and grain. The The paper revealed its limits. Mystery lingered there too. One annotation scraped off with a knife. Fibers raised like frost. Was it an error, a second thought, or something safer erased? By spring, the sheets left Lorraine bound in blue cord to courts, libraries, captains. The name traveled faster than any correction. On the map's southern arc, a river curved where none existed. A chain of hills promised water that never came. Beauty concealed fiction. In 1516, a new map removed the name, but the first one held. A printer once said, "They always keep the first name, even when it's wrong." So the map was hung. Wax dripped to stone. A canoe cut a river beyond its reach. Stalks lifted from marshes no one had charted. The center stayed unwritten. The name remained. The world beneath it did not. The candle sputtered. Wax slid down its side, pooling beside a sheet of vellum. A cartographer leaned low. His quill hovered above pale emptiness. The coastlines were marked. Inland, the paper remained bare, an ocean of white. Seville, 1525. Ships had returned from the Caribbean, their holds filled with sugar, parrots, coral. They spoke of rivers, mountains, but never enough. The world on paper reflected this: confident edges, empty centers. The air smelled of oil and damp cloth. A brass astrolabe lay nearby, cool to the touch, engraved with patience. A velvet-lined case held compasses, polished like jewelry. These objects endured, proud, still, silent. Mystery lived in the blankness. Was the emptiness caution or intention? Sometimes dragons filled it. Latin phrases, terra incognita, or only dots for villages no one had seen. A pilot tapped the margin of a chart. "It looks whole." The cartographer replied, "That's not the same." The presses rolled anyway. Charts were printed, colored by apprentices with green-stained fingers, sold in Antwerp, Lisbon, Florence, admired in walnut parlors under bronze chandeliers. But if you looked closely, rivers bent wrong. Mountains rose where none existed. Silence had been disguised as certainty. Sailors carried these charts across oceans. They unfolded them by lantern light in creaking cabins. "Here should be a bay," a captain said. Days later, only cliffs. Did he blame the paper or himself? By 1539, Dorado marched into the continent's interior. His journal spoke of swamps, forests, rivers wide enough to lose an army. But on printed maps, those places collapsed to ink-thin lines. One nobleman commissioned a globe inlaid with stars, oceans painted ultramarine. It turned smoothly, its beauty hiding its error. Luxury survived truth. Mystery tilted its head. How did we confuse silence for knowledge? The blanks invited invention. Here be cities, here be gold. The ear tells us most. Picture the rooms where maps were drawn, quills scratching, then stopping. The quiet between strokes became the truest detail. Unfinished maps survive, folded charts browned with time, gaps in journals, lines that trail off midstream. They are artifacts of ignorance, lacquered with elegance. Luxury rests behind museum glass, astrolabes, compasses, globes that shine like stars. But beside them, mystery presses a finger to blank parchment and asks, what was left unwritten? Salt still clung to the ships as they anchored off Hispaniola. In 1492, Columbus wrote of an island rich with cotton, grain, villages, voices. 1 million people lived there. They offered food, parrots, woven belts. The newcomers brought steel, scarlet cloth, mirrors that gleamed like living things. The mistake had already landed, in breath. Before the first fort was finished, fever began. Bodies shook, skin blotched, coughs rang through huts. No sword had yet been raised. The villages fell quiet. Animals brought across the sea, chickens, pigs, horses, carried sickness faster than sails could. A clerk in Santo Domingo tried to record the change. His ledger survives, faint and fragile. At first, maize, cotton, salted fish. Then, short lines. Then, nothing. No flourish. Just a silence heavy enough to feel. Luxury stood untouched. Silver goblets on long tables. Velvet banners hung limp in heat. An ivory rosary lay coiled on a desk, smooth and alive against the palm. These objects endured, watching the collapse. Outside, fields stilled. No hearth smoked. No tools clanged. Only shovels scraped dirt for graves dug too quickly. Write it down, an official said. What's left to count, came the answer. By 1508, valleys lay empty. Houses stood open, pots cracked by cold fires. The smell of damp earth replaced music. The quiet lingered longer than the storm. Mystery shadows the records. Why did the ledgers stop when they did? What names were never inked at all? Were the clerks ordered to stop? Or did the ink dry with the people? By 1510, enslaved Africans were brought to replace the vanished. The Atlantic became a corridor of silence and profit. Sugar, pearls, silver, and silence traveled west to east. Suffering went the other way. Luxury still shimmered. Goblets, lace, ivory. The people beneath it disappeared. This was not just conquest. It was microbial colonization. You can still smell it. The wax, the rust, the rot of unburied things. The maps named the island. But breath, that erased it. The ships brought more than men. They brought sound. Hooves on planks, snorts in dark holds, chickens scratching in cages, pigs squealing, pressed together. The smell, Ammonia, straw, salt lingered long after the sails shifted. To Spaniards, animals meant progress, horses for prestige, cattle for permanence, pigs for abundance. But to the lands they landed on, they meant something else entirely. The first horses stepped ashore in Hispaniola in the 1490s, manes braided, tack polished. They poured unfamiliar sand. Villagers watched, awed and unsettled, thunder on four legs. Cattle followed, hides steaming under sun. Pigs rooted through gardens, chickens scattered into woods. Each carried its own invisible passengers. Diseases clung to their breath, dung, skin. Smallpox, measles, influenza, carried by animals. Faster than steel. By 1518, smallpox broke across Hispaniola. Entire towns emptied before weapons were drawn. Conquistadors reached villages already gone, homes still warm, fires still smoldering. Luxury persisted. A silver stirrup glinted in sun where a horse had died. A gilded buckle lay half buried in mud. A psalter bound in leather absorbed sweat and dust, but endured. They seemed to witness what the records did not. Mystery lives in journals that describe towns in silence. We walk among houses where fires are cold, though wood is stacked. Another wrote, "They are gone." No detail, no reason. The page ends. The five senses catch what ink avoids. Sight, swollen faces. Sound, coughing that shook thin walls. Touch, fevered skin, hot as iron. Taste, brackish water drunk alone. Smell, sweet, sour rot rising from stillness. In Spain, horses were painted with gold bridles, noblemen astride. In the Americas, they carried something deeper, silence. The mistake wasn't bringing animals, it was believing they brought only civilization. A settler watched pigs scatter into the forest and muttered, "They'll outlast us." He was right, they did. The road into the valley smelled of pine and smoke. In 1519, Hernan Cortes marched across volcanic soil. Horses stamped, banners cracked, armor clinked in rhythm. Tenochtitlan waited ahead, a city of water and stone. It was vast, canals alive with canoes, towers rising above gardens, markets buzzing with obsidian blades, cacao, feathers, bells. Fires cooked maize, incense rose from altars, and clay pots overflowed with flowers. Cortes saw grandeur. He mistook it for permanence. But sickness had arrived before him. Smallpox came with a single man. Fever spread before muskets fired. Whole quarters emptied. Voices failed. The empire shook before the battle began. Steel didn't conquer. Breath did. Luxury lingered in the collapse. A turquoise mask. Flawless. A golden disc. Glowing in torchlight. A feathered cloak, folded in a chest no one opened again. Cortes dined in palaces hung with dyed banners. gardens whispered, aviaries sang, yet outside, silence grew. We found a village with maize still warm on the fire, a soldier wrote, but no one to eat it. He said nothing more. By 1520, siege began. The canals clogged, fires burned, the city hollowed. Luxury glowed through the ruin. Silver chalices melted down. Jade spools forgotten in baskets. A cinnabar streaked idol stood, watching. Mystery stayed quiet in the gaps. Whose names were lost? Which prayers were whispered in the last dark hours? Chronicles gave lists, numbers, spoils, not grief. The mistake was believing conquest came with weapons, but the empire had already been undone, not by steel, by silence. The road smelled of ash, though no fires burned. Spanish soldiers walked through an abandoned village. Doors hung open. Pots lay cracked. Fields heavy with corn had no hands to harvest. A letter from the Valley of Mexico in 1521 reads, "We entered the village and found it deserted. The houses are full. No voices within. No explanation. No farewell. Just silence. Mystery clings to those omissions. Why stop writing where the story begins? Was it fear? Was it grief, too deep for ink? The senses filled in the absence. Sight. Reed mats laid out for sleep, still fresh. Sound. Boots echoing where laughter once rang. Smell. Fruit collapsing in baskets. Touch. Walls warm from sun but untouched. Taste. Water drawn from jars no lips met. Luxury remained untouched. A turquoise pendant, luminous in the dust. A silver cup, rim unbroken, still set beside a fire pit. A cotton cloak folded neatly, as if waiting. One conquistador scribbled in a margin, "The land is full, the people are not." South in the Andes, the pattern repeated. Fields tilled, houses swept, tools in place, but no one home. Journals spoke of grain stored and left. The smell of cut stalks hung in the air. Perhaps they fled. There is nowhere to run. Ledgers once listing tribute grew thin, then blank. Luxury sailed back to Spain. Gold masks, feathered shields, jade beads, glowing in court salons. Guests admired the objects, never knowing what had vanished around them. The mistake was not asking. Empty towns were seen as opportunity. No one paused to wonder what emptiness meant. Mystery waits beside the silence. Which names went unwritten? Which words were swallowed? The letters remain. The voices do not. The lake smelled of lilies and ash. Canoes cut through calm water toward the heart of Tenochtitlan. When Cortés arrived in 1519, he called it grander than Seville. Canals teemed with life, towers shimmered, gardens floated, markets buzzed with cacao, obsidian, feathers, copper bells. Cortés saw splendor. He mistook it for control. By 1521, the city burned. Smallpox struck first, then siege, then starvation. Streets filled with bodies, waterways clogged with smoke. And still, gold glimmered. Soldiers tore idols from altars, melted them into bars. A turquoise mask, delicate and whole, was lifted from a darkened temple. Silver chalices stacked in corners, glowing in torchlight. Cortés sent lists, 200 loads of gold, 50 of silver, no names, no grief. One inventory ends. Item 247, Mask of Tears. The next page is gone. He dined in palaces hung with cotton banners. Fountains whispered nearby, but whole districts lay quiet. Death arrived before conquest. A soldier wrote, "We found a house with bread still warm. No one inside." He said no more. Luxury survived. A feathered cloak, folded. A gold disc, thin as sunlight, wrapped in cloth. A stone idol painted red. These things watched, wordless. Mystery hides in the lists. What was lost? Who wasn't counted? The true conquest happened before the swords. Fever, silence, hunger. Cortés claimed victory, but it was absence that won. The plaza smelled of dust and sweat. Horses stamped on stone, iron shoes sparking. Francisco Pizarro stood with fewer than 200 men beneath Cajamarca's walls. Across the square, Atahualpa, emperor of the Inca, arrived, carried in a litter, feathers shimmering in the sun. The air went still. A priest stepped forward, reading aloud from a Bible. Atahualpa raised it, listened, dropped it. The book hit the earth softly. That sound changed everything. Pizarro raised his hand. Muskets fired, hooves thundered, steel flashed. The plaza filled with smoke and screams. Atahualpa was seized and locked in a stone chamber. He offered ransom, one room filled with gold, twice over with silver. The Spaniards agreed. Treasure poured in. Temple masks, sun discs, necklaces, statues. Metal melted into bars. The room glowed like fire. A clerk began the list. Item 236, sun disc, 237, emerald necklace, 238. The ink trails off. The page is missing. Mystery asks why. Interrupted? Torn out? Or silence chosen over truth? Luxury waited in the room. A golden goblet, dented but warm with light. A sword inlaid with turquoise resting against stone. A woven cloak, folded, still holding its shape. The room filled. Still, Pizarro held him. "We will take the gold," a soldier wrote. "We will not free the king." In August 1533, Atahualpa was executed. His chamber emptied. The list was completed. He was not. The mistake was believing gold could buy peace. The empire fell. Rebellions followed. Spain gained territory, but not trust. not permanence. Luxury endured, mystery remained. The sword, the goblet, the cloak, still breathing, long after names went quiet. And you, what lingers more? The glow of the treasure, or the silence that followed? Tell me in the comments. If you're drawn to history written in fragments, in objects, absences, and untold endings. Like this video, subscribe to History's Ledger, and let's keep turning the page. The air smelled of fire and cane. In the 1400s, Portuguese settlers carved terraces into Madeira's hills, planting sugar where forest once stood. Fires burned through the night. Ash drifted over villages, clinging to skin. Sugar was white gold. Water wheels turned. Blades sliced stalks. Juice boiled in copper kettles. Steam stung the eyes. The air turned sweet, then bitter. Luxury followed quickly. In Lisbon, nobles stirred sugar into spiced wine. In Antwerp, crystal dishes held candied fruit. Recipes dripped with rose water, poured into porcelain bowls painted in blue. Sweetness became prestige, but mystery moved beside it. Ledgers showed weights and prices, not names. Who cut the cane? Who built the terraces? The records didn't say. Silence thickened between lines. By the 1490s, sugar moved west, to the Canaries, to Hispaniola, to the Caribbean. Enslaved Africans labored in fields. Chains clinked beneath the roar of boiling vats. Machetes flashed. The noise never stopped. A planter wrote, "We will have sweetness enough to build a city." He didn't mention the graves. Luxury gleamed in ruin. In Santo Domingo, lace curtains yellowed in heat. Brass candlesticks flickered. A harpsichord, imported from Seville, sat mute in a corner. It breathed, silent, polished, untouched. Storms flattened fields. Disease swept barracks. Rebellions burned the illusion. Ships still carried barrels to Europe. Sugar masked the ash. Mystery points to the margin. Maps listed plantations like cities, but names are missing. Ledgers copied by careful hands say nothing of sweat, fever, or loss. The mistake was confusing wealth with permanence. Sugar fed the empire and hollowed it. Luxury survived longer than the planters. The goblets, the crystal, the porcelain, objects now in collections, gleaming in glass cases, as if proud of outlasting the sweetness that fed them. And what remains of the fields? Only soil thin and silent, carrying the memory of voices never written. The harbor smelled of pitch and brine. Carts rattled across stone. Ropes strained as barrels of sugar and crates of tobacco came ashore. In the 1500s, Havana, Spain raised walls, lit oil lamps, planted flags on coral bastions. The city was meant to last forever. Inside the governor's palace, luxury crowded every surface. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, Silver spoons lifted to lips stained with chocolate and wine. A harpsichord stood silent in the corner, ivory keys humming faintly in the wind. It looked eternal. Beyond the gates, the air thickened. Barracks reeked of sweat and mildew. The sugar fields buzzed with mosquitoes. In the alleys, puddles bred fever. Rainwater gathered in cracked tiles. The city shined on maps, but its foundations trembled. The ledgers list cargo precisely. 300 barrels sugar, 50 casks wine, 24 candlesticks. Then a line ends abruptly. 2 chests, contents. The page is torn. Mystery sharpens what's missing. Was it gold? Maps? Name? No one wrote it down. One merchant sent word to Seville. We build halls for kings, but storms pull at our roofs. Hurricanes cracked shutters, tore roofs, toppled the illusion. Chandeliers rang like bells during gales. Prayers whispered in stone halls as water rose. At the feast table, cloves and oranges masked decay. Outside, soldiers waited with damp powder. Velvet curtains danced over cracked windows. A clerk wrote in the margin, "The city shines, but its roots are sand." Luxury outlived each storm. After the 1552 hurricane, shards of crystal were found in the rubble, unbroken. A silver crucifix, blackened, still gleamed. A lace shawl folded in a cedar chest, its owner forgotten. Mystery lingers in those folds. Who lit the candles when storms closed in? Who wrote down what was never meant to be read? The mistake was believing architecture could outlast memory. That stone could stand where silence grows. Havana endured, but never as it was drawn. The wind off the Carolina coast smelled of pine and salt. Waves struck the barrier islands with slow force. In 1587, more than 100 settlers landed at Roanoke. They built timber houses, raised palisades, planted gardens. Smoke lifted thin above the Atlantic horizon. For a season, life took root. Cradles rocked, spindles turned. Children's voices rose between huts. John White, their governor, mapped the coast, ink sharp on parchment. Then he sailed for England. When he returned in 1590, the colony was gone. Houses dismantled, palisades standing, gardens overgrown, fire pits cold. No graves, no bodies, just one word carved deep into a post. CROATOAN. Mystery lives in that word. A destination, a farewell. The carving was clean, deliberate, not made in panic. But no trace of the settlers remained. Luxury lingered, a brass compass, needle still trembling, a blue glass bead, bright against the soil, a pewter spoon resting beside a hearthstone black with soot. John White walked among the ruins. He found papers ruined by rain, armor flaking with rust. "They were here," he whispered. No one replied. The 5 senses etched the silence. Sight, beams stacked, dismantled, not destroyed. Sound, only gulls and surf. Smell, pine sap and damp earth. Touch, carved letters rough under his hand. Taste, brackish water drawn from a leaf-filled well. He tried to sail to CROATOAN Island. Storms drove him back. The record ends. What happened? Alliance? Flight? Disaster? Is lost. Luxury survived. The compass, the bead, the spoon. Still breathing. The mistake was assuming the story would wait. That silence was just a pause, not an ending. What lingers louder? The carved word, or the silence that explains it? The coquina walls of St. Augustine held the sound of waves. Built in 1565, Spain's outpost clung to Florida's edge. Houses smelled of lime, tar, salt. Hurricanes, raids, and fire tore through. The town rose and fell in cycles of smoke. Centuries later, beneath charred beams and broken tiles, a box was found. Wood swollen, hinges rusted, lid sealed by time. Inside, 3 items. A brass key, heavy, cut for a lock no one knows. A gold ring, Latin inscription faded, owner unknown. A scrap of paper, 1 word in brown ink. Cibola. Luxury endured, mystery sharpened it. The 5 senses pressed close. Sight, rust blooming on iron. Sound, insects feeding in the silence. Smell, damp paper, old wood. Touch, the ring's weight, cool against skin. Taste, salt air rising from earth. What was the box? A soldier's keepsake? A governor's order? The ledgers say nothing. The item was never logged. A friar once wrote, "We lost more than walls. God keeps the rest." Did he mean this? The town above burned and was rebuilt. Flags raised again, sermons echoed in chapels. Outside, native voices watched in silence. Luxury outlasted them all. The ring, the key, the paper, waiting. And Cibola, the name of a city made from rumor. Was it a destination, a deception, or a hope no one dared name aloud? The mistake was believing time moves forward in straight lines. But the box proves otherwise. It waited, and silence lasted longer than stone. The docks of Lisbon were never quiet. Even before dawn, the air was thick with the smell of tar, brine, and citrus rinds left rotting on planks. Carts rattled, hooves clattered against stone, sailors shouted through mist. In 1502, a clerk noticed something odd beneath the pier, wedged in mud between barnacle-crusted pilings. A glass bottle, sealed in wax, its shape glistening faintly where tide had washed it clean. When the bottle was broken open, a scroll slipped out, damp, fragile, smelling of salt and mildew. The handwriting was Portuguese, the ink browned and uneven. The opening lines described a voyage along a coast unknown. We have found a shore. It is not the east. The water is soft, the land wide, the sky larger than thought. Then the words stopped, the entry unsigned, no date beyond the year, no name to claim the hand. Mystery lives in that silence. Was it abandoned? Was it hidden deliberately? Why a bottle, sealed and buried beneath a dock? Some believed it was a sailor's private confession, smuggled ashore away from the official log. Others thought it was a fragment of a captain's report, cut away before reaching the crown. Whatever its origin, the scroll became more haunting in what it withheld than in what it said. The five senses deepened that absence. Sight, letters thin where the ink had run, curling as if the words themselves wanted to disappear. Sound, gulls circling above, their cries high and sharp, mocking the silence of the page. Smell, a mix of mildew, fish, and damp rope. Scents that clung even as the paper dried. Touch, brittle parchment cracking beneath fingers, flakes of salt crusting the surface. Taste, the faint bitterness of salt air when the sheet was lifted close to read. Luxury surrounded the discovery in ways both subtle and loud. A brass astrolabe, engraved with delicate circles, rested on the same table where the scroll was studied. A silver-tipped compass gleamed in lamplight, its needle trembling as if unsettled by the words. Velvet cases lined with silk held charts rolled tight, their edges flecked with gold leaf, for patrons who demanded beauty as much as accuracy. These objects breathed in the silence, proud to endure when the scroll itself frayed. The entry unsettled Lisbon. Reports of voyages to the west had already stirred curiosity. Columbus's letters of 1493, with their confident naming of islands, circulated through courts. Vespucci's letters, 1499 to 1502, spoke of a vast new quarter of the world. Yet here was a voice, unknown, unsigned, describing a coast not Asia, not Africa, but something else. Who wrote it? A sailor weary of lies? A captain fearful of making claims? Or a clerk instructed to erase a name? One merchant leaned over the scroll and whispered, "If this is true, the maps are wrong." His companion replied, "Better a map that lies than no map at all." The words, though casual, reveal the tension of the time. Certainty demanded even where silence was safer. The scroll was folded again, sealed in a drawer. Inventories of the Casa da India listed gold, ivory, pepper, and silk. Nowhere do they list the bottle. The object vanished into archives or hands that never spoke of it again. Luxury outlived the voice. The astrolabe is still polished. The compass still points north. The velvet cases still smell faintly of cedar and dust. The scroll, however, survives only as fragments. Mystery leans heavily here. Why preserve the scroll in a bottle? Why bury it beneath a dock? where tide and time could erase it. Perhaps the silence was intentional, a message meant to be found only by chance, a ghost of a journey never claimed. The mistake was forgetting that silence between voyages matters as much as voyages themselves. The gaps in the record carry weight. The unsigned line in the scroll tells us more about fragility than any triumphant proclamation. And so we are left with absence dressed as presence, a bottle buried in mud, a scroll unread, words cut short. The scroll whispered of a coast. The key detail missing is whose hand held the pen. And you, what lingers more? The line that was written, or the silence that followed it? Cold stone held the night even at noon. In the Casa de la Contratación at Seville, a clerk pulled a bundle from a shelf so high the ladder trembled. Cord cut, seal broken. The smell rose first. Oak gall, warm wax, dust. He set the ledger on a table draped in damask, touched 2 fingers to the cover, and opened to a page where the ink was confident down the left margin and vanished to nothing on the right. A ship's register from 1522, the year Victoria limped home from the world's first circumnavigation, carried lists of barrels, men, repairs, nails, 3 arrobas, biscuit, 10 cargas, crew, 19. Dead, the quill had paused there. After dead, there was only white, bright as breath in winter. In Lisbon, a notary warmed his hands above a brazier and scraped a line from a charter with a knife, so fine it sang. The page lifted slightly under the blade. Fibers stood up like frost, then lay down again at a touch. Cancelado, he wrote in the margin, a word that can mean correction or refusal or fear. Antwerp kept good books, too good. A ledger from the 1540s recorded cargo to the jewel weight. Pepper, ginger, cochineal. Sacks of sugar marked with merchants' brands. 1 coffer sealed in blue silk. The next folio was missing, cut close to the stitching with a penknife. Nothing smelled of fire. Nothing bore water stains. It was a neat absence, deliberate as a closed door. You can hear the gaps if you listen. Pages turn, leather creaks, a quill scratches and stops. Silence is a sound in these rooms. Objects surround the hush. A crystal inkwell catches a square of light and throws it back in a thin, sharp line. A signet ring, gold, heavy, rests in a shallow dish beside wafers of red wax, its intaglio lion ready to bite into warm lacquer. A walnut press gleams where generations of hands have polished the arm. None of this speaks. All of it witnesses. Worms work at the edges. A crown-shaped hole eats through a map of the Gulf of Paria, turning a cove into ornament. Soot drifts from a fire, long cold in Simanca. A ribbon of smoke years ago blackened the upper corner of a log from 1539, the year De Soto crossed a broad brown river he could not name on any chart he carried. Char, turn the ink to a film the color of tea. The numbers are ghosts now, legible only when the page tilts to the lamp. Write cleaner, a master murmurs to an apprentice whose hand blots. The boy nods, cheeks pink, and sprinkles pumice. For a time the lines behave, water casks replaced, pilot dismissed, new helmsman bask. Then the sea asserts itself in the paper, a tide mark climbs the gutter, salt bursts bloom across the linen fibers, letters crystallize and shred. What do you make of a history that dissolves where it matters most? In Valladolid, a shipping list ends with 2 bales of dyed cotton, 1 chest marked with a star. Someone added, later, in a smaller hand, arrived without the chest. Underlined twice. No report follows. In Havana, a municipal record from 1552 inventories storm damage, tiles, beams, anchors, and then, in cramped script, papers, sundry. That is all. A whole town's memory folded under a single word. Luxury finds a way to persist where names do not. A rock crystal seal matrix presses its pattern into wax that still glows when the lamp leans close. A vellum wrapper, tied with green silk, is soft as leaf. An agate bead stitched to a bookmark slides cool under the thumb as someone hunts for a date. These touchstones outlast the men who owned them. They carry fingerprints pressed so long ago, the grease has become another kind of glue. Here and there, voices leak through. A pilot in 1531, writing in a margin much too small, pleads, "Do not send me with the same chart. It lies, the line is slanted, urgent, half a confession, half a prayer." Beside it, a clerk with tidy habits has written, "Nota bene," replaced. The contradiction remains. Fear beside procedure, ink beside ink. Some gaps feel like mercy. A deposition about a coastal raid trails off when a witness begins to name children. The scribe's quill lifts, scratches the edge of the page, and the record moves on to sails, yards, weather. Did he choose restraint? Or did a hand on his shoulder stop him? You can smell absence. A mildew thread runs through notarial protocols stored too near the floor. Glue flowers into sweetness where a binding dried too fast. Scorched parchment carries a faint bacon note from the days when skins were flamed to tighten them on frames. Taste it in the air. A metallic tang from iron gall, a bite of lamp smoke on the tongue when you lean too close. Close to midnight in Seville, someone ties blue cord around a packet labeled 1541/Cartus. The label is new, the letters inside are old, corners turned, edges foxed. One with a child's thumbprint pressed in the margin, beside a word for river. Who was the child? Why was that letter in a house, not a chancery, long enough for a small hand to find it? The bundle gives no answer. It never will. An inventory clerk in 1571 writes with enviable care, line, 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 each column married to the next, with totals that add clean. Then a blot. then a smear where he tried to lift it with a knife, then a void 4 lines wide. The page resumes with a different hand, a different ink, a different weight of nib. Whose day ended there? Whose began? Maps, too, tell on themselves. An engraver in Antwerp hatches mountains into existence because the patron expects texture. Later, a second hand has penciled a note in the south. No hills here, marsh. The pencil is faint. The engraver's burren is forever. The marsh remains a ridge to every eye that trusts the plate. Shall we copy it as we found it? A junior clerk asks in Lisbon, weighing a broken register with both palms. As we can, the keeper says. He does not look up. His breath fogs the glass of the lamp's horn pane, then clears. If you align the fragments, the abrupt dead in Seville, the papers, sundry in Havana, the knife scrape in Lisbon, you see a pattern that is not pattern but weather. The record tears where pressure was greatest, storm, war, hunger, fear, convenience. What belongs there that we will never touch? Which names? Which routes? Which small mercies? Luxury is still here, patient. The seal, the inkwell, the brocade coverlet that keeps the stack from dust. Absence is still here, louder. The white where ink should be, the hole where thread once ran, the neat half sentence that refuses to finish. Someone closes the ledger. The thump is gentle. The echo climbs the shelves and fades into stone. A length of silk cord is tied. A docket slips into place, year, hand, shelf. And a breath is held just a little too long before the lamp is turned down. Outside, the river moves on without keeping anything at all. Maps are rarely blank for long. When silence covers the land, rumor steps in with a louder voice. By the mid-1500s, Spanish and Portuguese explorers returned with stories of golden kingdoms, Cibola in the north, Dorado in the south. Rumors pressed into parchment where knowledge was missing. The absence became an invitation. One chart in Seville shows the 7 cities of Cibola marked with neat crosses, though no ship had seen them. Another globe in Nuremberg carried a bright circle where cartographers guessed a city should be. The paper smelled of fresh ink, the varnish on the globe sharp as pine resin. Certainty was drawn over silence like a curtain. Luxury gave these rumors weight. A friar's report from Mexico included a golden chalice, its rim dented but glimmering. A conquistador carried back a turquoise earring, its stone translucent as water. A Strongbox in Spain was opened to reveal a mask, hammered from sheets of gold, eyes wide, mouth thin. These objects seem to breathe, as though they confirm the rumors. But objects do not speak of origin. They endure while names vanish. The 5 senses made the promises feel real. Sight, dust on boots that had walked far inland, proof enough for courts eager for wealth. Smell, parchment warmed in the sun, ink drying fast as notaries copied words from tired voices. Sound, a quill scratching the word Cibola into margins, louder than the silence it replaced. Touch. Smooth beads of turquoise passed from hand to hand, cool against fevered palms. Taste. Sugar stirred into wine at banquets, where maps of phantom cities hung on walls. In 1539, Marcos de Niza claimed he had seen the 7 cities from a distance. He wrote of houses of stone shining in the sun. But no one could confirm it. Did he mistake sandstone cliffs for gold? Did he lie, or did his eyes betray him in desert light? The ledger copies his words cleanly without doubt. Mystery stands in the margin, reminding us what the ink could not prove. The tension sharpened when expeditions followed. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado marched north in 1540, across plains that seemed endless. Horses sank to their knees in grass. Cattle scattered like dark waves. When he reached Cibola, it was no city of gold, only pueblos of mud and stone. The silence between rumor and reality was heavier than his armor. "Is this all?" one soldier asked, dust covering his face. Another spat and said, "They lied to us." But who lied? The friar who mistook light on stone? The cartographer who filled blank spaces with kingdoms? Or the silence itself, misunderstood as promise? Luxury still returned to Spain. A feathered shield, bright as fire, dazzled in palaces. A jade figurine, small enough to fit in a palm, was shown in candlelight to noble guests. These objects became proof of stories never true. They breathed quietly, proud of surviving even as the myths they supported crumbled. And in South America, whispers of El Dorado spread. A man covered in gold dust, bathing in a sacred lake, leaving coins on the shore. Spanish expeditions searched forests dense with heat, rivers thick with insects, the air metallic with humidity. They found fragments, earrings, masks, beads, but never the city itself. Still, maps inked the word El Dorado in valleys no one had seen. Silence was overwritten by desire. Mystery lingers there. Why do rumors last longer than corrections? Why do phantom cities remain on maps decades after expeditions failed? Perhaps because silence is uncomfortable. Perhaps because luxury whispers louder than truth. The mistake was treating rumor as record, believing that gold described in absence was as real as stone. What endures longer? The mask in the strongbox, eyes unblinking, or the blank space on a map where rumor was written as fact? And if you saw only silence, would you have filled it with gold? The November wind cut sharp across the harbor. Salt spray stung the skin, and the timbers of the Mayflower groaned where ice clung to the rigging. In 1620, 100 men and women came ashore at Plymouth. They built houses quickly. The smell of pine resin thick as beams were hewn, nails hammered fast before snow could bury the tools. Smoke rose from thin chimneys, gray against the cold sky. For a time, The colony survived on faith more than food. A journal records a strange line. We have built a table. God may sit at it, though we have no chairs. The oak was rough, its legs uneven, the wood still smelling of sap. It stood in the middle of a cabin where the floor creaked beneath feet. No chairs, no comfort, only a table that felt more like a prayer than a piece of furniture. The five senses marked their struggle. Sight, frost covering windows so thick it blurred the faces within. Sound, coughing at night, broken only by the wind pressing against walls. Smell, smoke from green wood fires, acrid and thin. Touch, blankets stiff with salt from the voyage, still damp weeks later. Taste, broth boiled thin with whatever could be found, bitterness clinging to the tongue. Luxury had crossed the ocean, absurd in its endurance. A silver spoon engraved in London, laid carefully beside bowls of porridge made from ground acorns. A lace cap, folded neatly in a chest, though its owner died before winter ended. A small Delft cup, cracked on the voyage, filled not with wine, but with brackish water pulled from a well. These objects were alive in their way, fragile witnesses to a colony that mistook survival for permanence. Mystery waits in the silences of their records. Whole names vanish from lists before spring. Diaries speak of 6 dead this week without saying who they were. The passenger roll grows thin, not by erasure, but by absence. Why did some names survive in ink, while others faded with no mention? What choices were made in the writing, and the not writing? Tension grew as weeks turned. Hunger pressed in, frost deepened, sickness spread. Only half survived the first winter, and yet, in spring, corn was planted with guidance from those who had lived on the land long before them. Smoke returned to hearths. Children's voices carried faintly again. The table remained, rough but upright. A symbol, a statement, but no chairs. Luxury sat quietly in corners, still present. The spoon, the cap, the cup, breathing softly as if they remembered more than the journals dared to write. And you, what speaks louder to you? The oak table offered to God without chairs, or the silence of names left unwritten? The plaza smelled of dust and cedar smoke. In 1610, the Spanish raised their capital at Santa Fe, stone walls glowing pale in the sun, chapels ringing with brass bells cast in Seville. The air was sharp with incense, the floors cool with tile painted in blue and green. Friars poured wine into silver chalices, their surfaces catching candlelight, their rims pressed against lips that spoke in Latin. For 70 years, the colony believed its permanence was assured. Then came 1680. Drums rolled through Pueblo villages, low and steady. Smoke rose in thin columns across the horizon, signals carrying messages older than the chapels. At dawn, the revolt began. Churches burned, rafters groaning, the smell of pine and incense twisting into acrid black. Friars fell, Soldiers fled. The bells of Santa Fe were silenced, ropes cut, clappers shattered on the ground. The Spanish left the city behind, their voices swallowed by desert wind. For 12 years, Santa Fe was quiet of conquest. The adobe walls remained, scarred but upright. Kivas glowed again with fire. The smell of sage filled plazas once thick with incense. And in that silence, objects endured like uneasy witnesses. A gilt chalice overturned in dust, a cedar door carved with crosses, leaning half buried in sand, a fragment of tile mosaic still bright, though the room around it lay in ruin. Luxury remained, breathing faintly, alive in ways its owners could not control. Mystery presses close in those years. How did memory shift in the silence? Did voices carry relief? Did they carry fear that the Spanish might return? The records left by survivors speak cautiously, their words brief. Silence speaks louder than their ink. When 1692 came, the Spanish marched back. Governor Diego de Vargas carried banners and promises of clemency, but also muskets, armor, and prayers for victory. He entered the plaza again. A procession unfurled, chalices polished anew, vestments drawn from trunks that smelled of cedar and moths. The bells rang once more, their iron voices echoing across dry fields. But did anyone trust them? The city looked permanent again, but its foundations trembled. Adobe still smelled of smoke from 1680. The walls carried the memory of hands that had painted them bright with symbols older than Spain. The bells tolled, yet their sound felt brittle, as if it might break in the next wind. A soldier wrote in his diary, "We hold the city again, though not as before." He left the line at that. No triumph, just an uneasy truth. Luxury gleamed regardless. Brass candlesticks lit chapels. Velvet vestments shimmered in candlelight. A silver crucifix, carried through the streets, glowed in the setting sun. Yet outside the walls, the desert stretched wide, silent, indifferent. Mystery leaned into that space, pointing not to what was rebuilt, but to what was missing. The mistake was believing conquest equaled survival, that a city taken, lost, and taken again could ever erase silence. And you, what would you have heard louder? The toll of the bells as they rang once more, or the echo of 12 years when they did not? The room is quiet now. The maps are rolled, the ledgers shut, the ink dry. But the silence left behind is heavier than all the words written. 5 mistakes carried across oceans, shaping centuries. The first was confidence in paper. Maps inked with rivers that never ran, kingdoms that never stood. Names pressed over silence. They looked whole. They were not. The second was disease carried in breath and hoof. Villages fell quiet before sails even touched the shore. The air smelled of ash and damp wool. The sound of coughs louder than any cannon. The third was wealth mistaken for permanence. Gold melted in fire, chalices stacked in vaults, chandeliers swaying above dirt floors. For a time they gleamed, then storms, rebellions, hunger, and silence. The fourth was forgetting the gaps between voyages. The word CROATOAN carved into wood. A bottle buried in Lisbon's mud. A strongbox with a key and a ring but no name. Journals trailing mid-sentence. These absences tell us more than the proclamations ever could. The fifth was believing conquest meant survival. St. Augustine burned. Santa Fe silenced. Plymouth prayed over a table without chairs. Empires declared eternity, but eternity never came. Luxury endured like a ghost. A bead of blue glass, a spoon of silver, a mask of hammered gold, a chalice dented in dust, objects breathing faintly, alive long after the people who touched them were gone. Mystery stayed beside them, whispering through the spaces left unwritten. The missing names, the half-lines, the white centers of maps. What endures longer, the chandeliers in Havana, or the storms that shook them? The mask of tears, or the page cut away from its inventory? The table with no chairs, or the silence that gathered around it? History remembers what was copied in ink, but it is the silences, the absences, that shape what we feel. So let me ask you, which of these mistakes speaks loudest to you? Which silence lingers in your mind? Share it below. I would love to read your thoughts. And if these stories of absence, objects, and unanswered questions hold you, like this video, subscribe to History's Ledger and help me keep turning the pages together. Because the next video is waiting. What they never taught about the American Revolution. Not fireworks, not parchment under glass, but hunger, debt, betrayal, and vanished voices. A war remembered in flags, but lived in silence and absence. Stay with me. The ledger will open again.